Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Uma Kollam-Parimbo. I'm a professor in economics and the head of School of Economics and Finance at Wits University. It's my great pleasure today to welcome you to a discussion on championing small and medium enterprises growth in South Africa. In a high unemployment economy like South Africa, SME is often touted as the solution. But the fact is that SME share in South Africa is much lower than in other countries, be it OECD or other emerging economies. So the OECD economies, SMEs constitute about 50% of their GDP and account for 60 to 70% of employment. In the emerging economies, SMEs contribute to 60% of all employment and as much as 40% of GDP. And in comparison, South Africa has not realized the potential of SMEs. The segment provides employment to roughly 47% of the workforce. And note that their contribution to total economic output is only around 20% in South Africa. So it is clear that there is a lot of potential in South Africa that needs to be harnessed and nurtured. And to talk more about the challenges and opportunities of developing the SME segment in South Africa, we have with us today Mr. Michael Sassoon, the Group CEO of Sasfin Holdings Limited. He has been at the helm since 2018, prior to which he led both Sasfin Wealth and Sasfin Capital, and has also served as the Executive Director of Sasfin Bank and Sasfin Holdings. Michael's introduction of business with purpose has seen the bank rapidly advance as a social impact leader, increasing its focus on ESG investments. Recently, he has focused on supporting COVID-affected women and youth-led businesses with over rand 1 billion SME funding line from the Dutch Development Bank. Under his leadership, Sasfin has been focused on collecting savings and deploying that back into the economy through client-centric funding solutions, especially for SMEs. It is therefore a great opportunity for us to engage with Mr. Sassoon this afternoon on his vision for championing SME growth in South Africa. Michael holds an MBA with special interest in finance from the Simon Graduate School of Business at the University of Rochester, New York. So before I hand over the microphone to Michael, a few housekeeping rules. Michael will present for around 30 minutes, and then we will have the Q&A session. Please post your questions in the Q&A tab, and I shall then channel it to the speaker at the end of the presentation. So on that note, let me now welcome Michael and hand over the microphone.
Okay, thank you very much, Uma, and to Wits for hosting me on this celebratory year in terms of the centenary celebration. Wits obviously has been such an important institution within the South African context over so many years. Today, offering 3,000 courses to over 40,000 students and playing a meaningful role in developing the next generation of leaders. And it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to engage with you and your community. I'm going to just share my screen now. Sorry, let me just, can you let me know once you can see the screen, please?
That's good now.
Okay, thank you. So I think that SMEs or small medium enterprises is something which is often spoken about globally and in South Africa. And I think the challenges, the frustrations that face SMEs is something which is well documented. You know, I think it's known that there's a huge failure rate in South Africa of SMEs. Almost 80% of these businesses fail within the first 3 years, which means that only 1 in 5 will actually survive. And that is such a staggering blow to the South African economy. As Uma correctly pointed out, the SMEs that are able to succeed play such an important role in creating jobs that it's no wonder that with such a high failure rate, you have this very high unemployment rate by the expanded definition at 46%. And that is something which, as a South African, as someone who's very passionate about this country, obviously is a very upsetting set of statistics, which I've no doubt I share with everyone who's tuned into this presentation. And there are many challenges of an SME. You know, this picture which we were able to find tells it all. And when we engage with business owners in South Africa, you often kind of get this feeling of frustration. You know, there's so many different regulatory contexts, access to funding, access to markets, skills availability, dealing with you know, SOEs, and often big businesses can be very, very frustrating. And then you might be in manufacturing plants, and then you have electricity issues. So there are many challenges which face SMEs. And the one thing that I find whenever I engage with one of our clients, because we lend into this market, is that there's no doubt there are many challenges. Each of our clients, those that are succeeding and those that are struggling, share a similar frustration about some of the environmental difficulties for SMEs in South Africa. You know, I think that there are two ways to look at it. You know, on the one hand, if you're going to wait, as a, you know, I assume there might be some young aspiring entrepreneurs in the presentation. If you're going to wait for something to happen for your business, you're going to wait, be it funding or anything else, access to new markets, access to the right people, management expertise, etc. Then, quite frankly, being entrepreneur, whether you're in South Africa or any other environment in the world, is probably not the right avenue, the right course of action for you. Because the one thing that we find with the entrepreneurs that we face, and there are many of them that are succeeding, thriving in this environment, who have the same set of challenges and have the same challenges in terms of being able to access funding, and the same challenges in dealing with Eskom, and the same challenges in terms of the regulatory environment. But in all of that, they see an opportunity. They potentially coming up with something to deal with, you know, the challenge of, say, solar, or they're coming up with a new business which can deal with the challenge of access to funding. And there are the very challenges themselves can actually create the environment which can support a thriving business. So it's almost as though those businesses which are succeeding, they're not succeeding in spite of the challenging environment. In many instances, those businesses are succeeding because of the challenging environment. And that attitude, which often amazes me, because we'll meet with a new business that wants to apply for some credit, or an existing client of ours who have had many curveballs thrown at them, but they are resourceful. They are finding ways to adapt. They are empowering the people around them in a way which can really tackle these challenges. And that is the one thing, you know, if you ask what is the defining feature of an entrepreneur, in so many instances, that is the defining feature. And I'm not saying that that should undermine those entrepreneurs who are struggling with so many of these different challenges. And I'm not saying that that therefore creates an excuse for corporates and businesses and the government to say that we're not going to work very hard to create a more enabling or empowering environment to SMEs. But at the end of the day, the one common theme that you will find meeting any successful entrepreneur is that they had all those challenges in front of them. and they found ways to conquer those challenges. So I think before an entrepreneur starts to look outside of themselves as to what is the cause of their struggle and to point fingers elsewhere, the key thing is to look in the mirror. And I suppose this is not just a message for entrepreneurs, it's a message for professionals as well. At the end of the day, we always have the ability to respond to the cards that we dealt. And the way we respond will really be that which defines us. So what defines an entrepreneur? And the same theme that we've been engaging with many businesses that we've been supporting over the last a number of years, and I'll talk through more of those initiatives in a few minutes. But the one thing, there were a few common themes. So there's one quote from Mr. Sohana of Drip Footwear, the Drip Footwear founder, is this recognition of his own greatness. We are all great. And I think that that is something which is critical to being an entrepreneur. It's not to say that that should allow someone to become arrogant or not to retain humility, but at the end of the day, each one of us have been given the ability to achieve greatness in a sphere. And an SME, a business, an entrepreneur, is someone who has this big vision for themselves. They aren't just willing to accept the status quo, and they've got a big vision for their business. And this aspiration for greatness is something which is often embedded in entrepreneurs. The second quote over here is that an SME has to have grit. They have to persevere. They can't shy away from an entrepreneur can't shy away from the first challenge. So they're going to give, and they're going to give a bit more, and then they have to give some more after that. And only with that attitude of perseverance do great businesses actually get formed. And I think that most entrepreneurs that I've engaged with over the years, if you challenge them on their early careers and the first versions of their business, they will often tell you that there were big challenges and they made big mistakes. But what defined them was not the fact that they made the mistakes or had those challenges, but what they went again, and they went again, and they gave some more. And the third thing is that ultimately, no business can succeed off the back of one individual. And therefore, leadership is critical, and the leadership has to be about providing a vision and to take people along that journey. So I think that these three elements, which came out, we've been doing these SME surveys, and we've been interviewing SMEs in different ways over the last couple of years. These three themes, which we've picked out over here, is this aspiration for greatness, this willingness to have grit, and to have this big vision for themselves and their companies, and to take people along that journey, to lead people on that journey, are all definitional when it comes to an entrepreneur. So if we just look then, if I can just change course slightly and just talk a little bit about the role that Sasfin is playing. And Sasfin's been around for quite a long time. We were established in 1951. The business was actually established in South Africa by my grandfather. And it was established as a textile trading business. And then my father joined the business in the 60s, and they left the business and he rejoined the business in the late 70s, and they converted this textile trading business into a finance business. And listening to those stories growing up, there were many different challenges. But in essence, the business was formed out of an understanding that there are challenges facing business, and the challenges facing businesses in the 80s in South Africa, the late 80s, are quite different from the challenges that face business today, but there were many similar challenges. But the whole business was formed on this premise to say that an entrepreneur is often a misunderstood being inside the capital markets. They can go to a bank, and a traditional bank, a larger bank, and often that entrepreneur will end up being a number in a queue at a branch. And now the branches are being closed. So there'll be a number at a queue on a call center. And but their needs are a bit nuanced, and they need someone who's going to be able to walk the journey with them. Now, that is something which we were committed to then in the 80s, and that we are even more committed to today. The question that we've been grappling with over the last few years is, how do we take what we've done so successfully for so many entrepreneurs and to scale that up more? Because we know the difference that we've made to a large segment of entrepreneurs in this market. And we're just saying that there are so many businesses out there who we think that we could be taking that to further. And that is very much embedded in the Sasfin culture, and the way of thinking in our whole strategy is about how do we champion SME growth. And we understand that if we get that right, the impact that can have on South Africa in terms of GDP growth, in terms of increased tax revenues, in terms of job creation and innovation is so important, and therefore something which we are very passionate about. So I don't need to talk more about why SMEs are so important, but here are some statistics which talk to the critical role that SMEs play in the globe and in South Africa. And often I think that our statistics in South Africa are a little bit difficult to read, because there's so much happening in the informal sector or the informal economy, which is very difficult to kind of get a real sense of in terms of what that output is. To say that, just to talk through a couple of success stories at different stages of their businesses. So on the one hand, we partnered with a startup about 5 years ago by the name of Payable, who provides working capital finance to earlier stage businesses that often will struggle to even get access to credit from us, and definitely from the bigger banks. And that business over the last few years has developed new capabilities and new products. It's a young business making a very big difference in the lives of many SMEs. And that business was formed in the build-up to COVID and navigated the challenges of COVID and are growing from strength to strength. Another business that we partnered with many, many years ago, which today is a very successful, much larger business, is a business by the name of Innovent. It was founded by two Zimbabwean individuals who came to South Africa and built an asset finance business, which today provides a significant asset finance to a whole host of companies within the market. And there too, this business has now managed to globalize their business. And when we started with them, they were a very small business, and today they have grown leaps and bounds. And these businesses, I'm not going to talk through more of them to much more detail now, but they are great stories of successful South African entrepreneurs. And the third is a company by the name of Botle Bushle, where we provided some finance to this company. And this company has just moved their head office and their warehousing, and they support the rural economy through distributing critical goods and services into that economy. And they needed a way to be able to obtain necessary funding to procure the goods to be able to distribute into the rural economy, which we fortunately were able to provide them. And these are just three small stories, but I could tell you so many stories, and I could give you much, much more detail about these different businesses who have, through the challenges of the last decade of South Africa, and through the challenges of the last 3 years in particular, have not said, well, we can't do business in Africa, we're just going to go and join a big corporate, or that the challenge of regulatory and being able to access funding is too difficult. They went again, and they had big aspirations for themselves. And I can list a whole lot more of these very successful stories. So when thinking about, I think that the big question which every SME struggles with is how to attract funding. Now, the fact that 80% of SMEs fail in the first 3 years creates a big challenge for businesses like ours who wish to fund SMEs. We get no greater pleasure in providing access to finance to an SME. But obviously, as a bank, what's very important is that we are confident that the clients that we're going to lend money to will have the ability to repay the money, because we have a responsibility to all those people who trust us with their well-earned savings and to deposit money with us. And we do that through adopting an approach to credit, to lending, which is built on a very simple principle, that we are confident that the company will be able to repay us. Now, if we're going to say that the 80% of companies fail, as a lender, you have to become quite selective in who you fund. Now, many of these businesses might fail because they were unable to attract funding. But generally speaking, that isn't the whole story, and it's not the real story. Because if a business is built on sound principles at the outset, and proper systems are put in place, and the accounts are well managed, and a person builds depth in their team, and they run their business on sound principles, generally speaking, funding is available. So often when I hear a story that an SME comes along and says, we struggle to access funding, before I think about the limited options that may be available from funders, I try and think about what in this business needs to change in order to make that business an attractive destination to lend to, in a way that the lender, ourselves in this instance, can become confident that we're not going to give this company credit that they can't service, which in actual fact, you're then not doing a service to anyone, least of all the entrepreneur, and that we are able to help this business grow off the back of the funding. Because the one thing which we don't do at Sasfin is provide finance for consumerism. The finance that we are providing is for business growth. So therefore, it's important to us that when we evaluate a business, we understand the viability of the business and that business's ability to take that funding and to grow their business. And that is something which, when the SME is thinking about approaching us or any other funder for that matter, needs to think deeply about. But we do recognize that that there are many challenges facing the SME, and we are doing everything we can to assist our clients with these challenges. The one thing that we've done is we built a digital banking platform called Beyond, which we have designed especially to try and help SMEs with their paperwork and with their banking, which can be a big challenge in and of itself. I'm not even talking about now the ability for an SME to attract funding, but an SME needs to think about how they're going to invoice their clients, how they're going to pay their staff, how they're going to run their banking. And often these can be, each one can be its own package with its own complexity. And if you don't get that right, if you don't get those principles right quite early in the evolution of the business, many challenges can emerge. And having that sense of this big vision on the one hand needs to be supported by a certain degree of detail-orientated management on the other hand. And that we are saying to the SMEs, we understand that you can't necessarily go and employ an accountant and employ a payroll manager. And therefore, what we're trying to do in our banking platform is to enable SMEs to leverage many packages which are quite easily available and accessible in the market today, to ensure that the foundational elements of running a business are done well. But now what we've been able to do the last couple of years, and the professor, she did mention this a bit earlier, is we partnered with the Dutch Development Bank to be able to access a funding line which enables us to lend to SMEs which ordinarily we may have struggled to approve credit with. Without this arrangement that we've got with the Dutch Development Bank. It's a facility called Nasira. You can Google it. And we have lent to countless businesses off the back of the scheme, over 100 million rand in the last year. And these are smallish loans. Some loans can be up to 500,000 rand, and loans that are growing with that up to 4 or 5 million rand. Where we have supported SMEs who ordinarily would struggle to get access to funding. And then what we do with those SMEs is, as they get bigger and we were looking at one in our credit committee on Friday, a business which at the end of last year, quite a young business, it's only been going for a couple of years, founded by two very strong corporate professionals who had a big vision to support real grassroots consumers. We were able to structure a 500,000 Rand loan at the end of last year for them off the back of this guarantee. And since then, the business has grown. They've managed to win a few really good contracts. And on Friday last week, we were applying our mind as a business to now advancing a 10 million Rand facility to this business. And those are the type of opportunities which we are very committed to, because we're not really geared as a business, as Sasfin, to supporting a micro business that will always remain a micro business. We're far more interested in saying, how do we take a business from a young stage, from an earlier stage through the banking platform, through some credit as they grow in their development and they need access to bigger pools of funding to grow their business further. The second thing we've done is we've worked with many of our business clients to give them more exposure, because often small businesses struggle to access markets and to spend money on marketing and to kind of grow their businesses. So we're saying, beyond just being a bank, we want to help these businesses grow through that journey. And then I've spoken about the digital platform. So in every problem, there's an opportunity. And the problems which face SMEs today, we see as an opportunity. And we know that there are a whole generation of entrepreneurs in South Africa just waiting to be born. And hopefully some of them are on this call who want to walk this journey and understand that it's not an easy journey. It's the road less traveled, but it can be the most fulfilling journey. And it's what South Africa needs now more than ever. And I've no doubt that there are just so many opportunities in so many different industries. And we see new industries pop up all the time as the world changes. And that creates a lot of excitement for so many businesses to come into the system, which we hopefully will be able to work with. So I think that there are challenges facing SMEs. And as a company, we are doing what we can as well at a more systemic level to try and support SMEs and to enable SMEs through these different challenges. But I think that the key message, and this is a message for a South African business or a business anywhere in the world, is that business is not that simple. And at the end of the day, the real difference between success and failure is often you always need luck and blessing in life. But beyond luck or blessing, however you choose to see it, at the end of the day, the difference between success and failure is often the attitude of the people in the business and their ability to bounce back and to persevere and to find ways and means to navigate the challenges of the environment, to solve a problem for clients or for a segment of the market and to grow their business off the back of that. And that is something which we are committed to. And we have no doubt there are big opportunities. So I think that, in many ways, you can sit today and you can say, we've had COVID, we've got 46% unemployment, there's war now in Europe, supply chains have been knocked, there is low growth in the country, and you can almost become a victim. But each one of those things, COVID created a Zoom, this very platform. Supply chain effects create opportunities for local manufacture potentially, whereas businesses that had to rely previously on importing are now finding ways to source locally, et cetera, et cetera. Health crises create opportunities in that sector. So I think that all of the challenges which surround us create opportunities to grow and create opportunities for the truly entrepreneurially minded individuals. So thank you for joining us, and I'm happy to take any questions. I think my half an hour is up.
Thank you, Michael. your passion for SMEs has clearly come through. And I think the message of looking out for opportunities amidst challenges, I think it's applicable across all walks of life, entrepreneurship included. So with that, I think I'll get into a few of the questions that have popped up. Starting with David's question. David McClelland is a lecturer in the finance division of the school. So David wants to know, within the context, as you mentioned towards the end, of the conflict happening in Ukraine and Russia, and the resulting higher commodity prices, and eventually it is going to translate into a structurally much higher global inflation. So how do you see this panning out in terms of the impact on SMEs who are already under duress and still recovering from all the COVID impact?
Okay, thank you for the question. And I'm not, as I say, I'm not an economist, so it'll be interesting to get your view as well, Prof. Uma. But just to say that I think that the inflation, as we're seeing it, there are pros and cons. It depends what is the cause of the inflation. And to the degree that there's some commodity price inflation, that can create big opportunities for South Africa. And what we've seen in the last year, that the benefits that higher commodity prices have had on the mining sector and related industries, and we see that with many of our clients. And therefore, a little bit of inflation in that regard could actually be quite a positive thing. You know, obviously the way that the central bank responds to that in terms of interest rates become quite important. And if we do see a big spike in interest rates, that will put pressure on borrowers and SMEs. But hopefully the rand's remaining quite strong. And hopefully there won't be this huge, very quick spike in interest rates, but time will tell. And then, you know, I think that we're already facing electricity challenges in South Africa, and to the degree that the fuel price in particular grows, and the impact that that has on many businesses in terms of those that are very reliant on fuel, that can be quite a big challenge. So I think that, like everything else I've said in this presentation, this macroeconomic reality creates a big challenge in many instances, but an opportunity in other instances. So I think that hopefully that commodity price will continue to grow, which has a big benefit in South Africa. And I haven't yet been able to really quantify, or someone to share with me the extent of that benefit, but we saw it in the last budget. But there's no doubt on many businesses, especially those who are very reliant on fuel, it will cause a challenge. And if interest rates go up, that will cause another challenge.
Absolutely. I think thank you for that comprehensive response. I think you've covered both sides of the story, and the net effect on South Africa is really something that we hopeful won't be too drastic, and that we can leverage on the commodity boom going forward as well. Moving on to the next question. This is from James Britton, who is a senior lecturer in finance in the school. He writes, does Sasfin believe that its clients are seeing investment opportunities in South Africa rather than offshore?
That's a great question. And we've got different types of clients at Sasfin. So we do have a big wealth and asset management business, which deals with a more traditional investor, typically older, higher net worth individuals. And by and large, I think those clients are still committed to offshore investing, which has very much been the trend in the South African market over the last few years. But what has been quite pleasing to see in the last couple of years is the number of businesses that we face, which are now starting to borrow again and looking for acquisition finance, which demonstrates that there appears to be, in private markets in particular, more than in the JSE, there appears to be growing demand to invest in South Africa. So that reached a big challenge at the peak of COVID. And obviously, in the immediate aftermath of the looting last year, there was a huge reticence. But since then, I think that what we have started to see, and we've seen it through a growing loan book, and as I say, our lending is off the back of growth finance. There does appear to be, just in the last 6 months, 6 to 9 months, there does appear to be growing appetite for private investment in South Africa.
That's a good sign that there is confidence in the future of economic growth in South Africa. Moving on, there's a question from James Bernstein, also from School of Economics and Finance. Do you think that central bank digital currencies will help stimulate the growth of SMEs by creating a regulated cryptocurrency ecosystem that will facilitate a reduction in transaction costs?
Sure. There's always one question on cryptocurrency, and I never feel particularly qualified to answer any question on cryptocurrencies. And it is something which we have started to research in a lot more detail. I think that when one thinks about transaction costs and crypto is being used as a currency, I think it's important to distinguish between local payments and offshore payments. And in terms of local payments, I don't think that transaction costs of the banking system are really an inhibitor. I don't think it's that expensive to facilitate local trade. And I don't think I'm not aware of any SME that's listing their local bank charges as one of the top, 10 things which are challenging them as a business. Where I think this is a bigger challenge is on cross-border payments, remittance, and procuring overseas. And there, cryptos, I think, could potentially play a role. But how that gets regulated in terms of exchange control in particular, I think becomes a big question. So if it can be implemented in a way that is well regulated, and I think that will become very, very important given some of just the sanctions in the last few weeks that we've seen and the impact that's had on markets. For cross-border payments, I think that there's a lot of rounds that the regulators are going to have to go through over here before we really understand that. But there, I think there is an opportunity to simplify and to reduce the cost for SMEs, which can be quite a big burden, not just in terms of the actual rand value of these transactions, but the bureaucracy around the cross-border transactions. But how that plays itself out, we'll have to wait and see. I think they've got a big task ahead of them. Thanks, James. Good to hear from you.
So we move on to the next question. This is from Ricky Tats. What emerging risk are you most concerned about as CEO of business lending company?
I think that it remains a South Africa risk, I would say. And if we can't very effectively navigate the political challenges of the country, that I think does create some bigger risks in the market. So if corruption isn't appropriately dealt with now that we've seen the outcome of these Zondo reports, and some policy change isn't done in such a way that can really support a more business-friendly environment, I think that does create a medium-term challenge for business growth in South Africa, which could also see a brain drain in the country. And I think that backdrop, over a period where the ANC gets weakened and aren't able to effectively navigate the political challenges, I think that can and what that then looks like, what that translates to in terms of the next elections, I think that there's a lot of risk which remains in those different scenarios, which I would say is the biggest emerging risk that I'm most concerned about.
Thank you. The next question is from Daniela Casale. She's a professor in economics at the School of Economics and Finance. She asked a question that is quite close to my heart as well. And she has framed it as roughly what percentage of businesses that you end up supporting are owned by women? And based on your extensive knowledge of the sector, what do you find are some of the main barriers facing women-owned businesses? I also want to frame this question within the context of some research that the school has undertaken as well in the context not of South Africa, but some of the other SADC countries. We found that the COVID recovery has actually been significantly lower among women-owned businesses. So are you able to highlight some of the reasons why this could be so different by the gender of the business owner?
Sure, it's a good question, and I don't have a good answer, unfortunately. And I don't have any statistics that I can share with you around our own portfolio. What I can say is that in terms of the new loans and the new businesses that we've been engaging with over the last year or two, there is definitely a significant increase in the number of loans that we are giving to female entrepreneurs than to general entrepreneurs, or non-female entrepreneurs, relative to what we did historically, or relative to what's in our base. So I don't know if that's because of how we've shifted our business or if that's something in the market, but there definitely seems to be an increasing number of female entrepreneurs accessing our services. There are stereotypes. I don't know if these stereotypes are genuine stereotypes or not, which I think people say with regards to women entrepreneurial businesses in terms of the managing the household and the business, which can often create a challenge because especially in quite a patriarchal society, there's a big expectation of women on the home front than what there is of men on the home front. So trying to juggle those balls, I think, becomes a big challenge. I think that it could be that there are these views inside the workplace and dealing with clients, that there could be some of those same views which can inhibit a woman's ability to kind of deal across in their own business and externally. So they have to work double hard, not just because they're having to carry the home, but also because they're having to deal with the stereotypes that they're facing inside the business environment. It's something which I'm happy that we as a team spend more time thinking through. What our own experience is, and I see this both in terms of the people who run our businesses and the people who we deal with, is that often we are far more confident, not to generalize or to stereotype, in women-run businesses. They often there are many benefits which often you see, which is quite a clear pattern in a woman-run business versus a male-run business. But I think we'll have to do more work on it and potentially come back with a better thought-out answer than the one I've just given.
I think, Michael, perhaps we can help you in that. We as a school would like to engage with you and find answers to it together, perhaps, if the opportunity yields.
Yeah, we would appreciate that opportunity. Thank you.
Absolutely. So moving on to the question now from Bruno Tinel. He's a professor in economics as well in the school. He says, thanks for your presentation. Research shows that company size is related to inter-firm relations. In short, large firms need to use smaller firms as part of the strategy. How do you see this issue in the South African context?
Yeah, it's a good question. And And one thing which does frustrate me quite a lot is when we bank a client, a relatively small business, who is very dependent on large businesses, either as their supplier or as their clients. Because what tends to happen is the larger businesses squeeze out all the margin. And I think that the famous Michael Porter 5 forces, in terms of your ability to compete, is quite dependent on the stakeholders around you and where your pricing power is. So, the extent to which, and I know there have been campaigns which now businesses are starting to do in terms of paying SMEs earlier or on time, but it so often happens in the South African context that a large business is basically using the SME as their bank. Because they are paying the small supplier 90 or 120 days after date of invoice. So it does happen. And I think that the SME often becomes very dependent on the bigger business, which is not a great place to be in. We actually just today, we were dealing with one of our clients who's been struggling. And to some degree, the nature of their struggles is very much a function of being very dependent on two huge corporates within the South African context, who drove them very hard on margin and drove them very hard in terms of payment. Now, on the one hand, you can't blame a big business for trying to do what's best for their business, and that is how businesses operate. But that is one thing which does create challenge. And I think that one of the key principles that an SME should try as much as they can deal with is diversification amongst their clients and their suppliers, and to try and get away from being very reliant or dependent on one or two large businesses anywhere in their ecosystem. Often easier said than done. So often a business is a person who knows they can win 2 or 3 clients from somewhere in their history. They were working in a corporate and they know that these clients are a certain thing, and they kind of often are seeded off the back of 2 or 3 or 4 very large clients. But I think what every SME should be thinking about is how do they trade out of that reliance? How do they trade out of that position? Because if you aren't successful in doing that, obviously we as a bank, we always think about diversification of funding, diversification of clients, diversification of deposits and loans. That's how a bank is built. But some of that thinking is important in every business, to not create these reliances, because if you do, typically the large business knows that. And once they know that, then they will exert all the influence over the SME, which puts the SME in a very vulnerable position.
I think that advice against overexposure to any one client or supplier is also then valid to SMEs dependent on the government. Equally, we hear it all the time of how government payments are delayed more than, I suppose, 3 or 4 months that you referred to of the big corporate payment delays. We heard about the bread company recently that was not paid for supplying bread to Baragwanath Hospital, and how patients ended up without bread for a few days, and that resulted in a lot of hue and cry and eventually the supplier getting paid. So, but that's very unfortunate, like you say, when there is over-dependence and overexposure to entities that are not responsible. Moving on. So I don't see other questions from the forum. So let me take this opportunity perhaps then to pose a couple of my own questions. So you mentioned that the SME statistics in the country really needs to be taken with a pinch of salt, because there is an under the radar informal sector. The data is anybody's guess. So my question really would be, how can we think about transitioning this informal sector to bring them within the ambit of our legal framework and tax framework and labor laws, and bring them into a more formal economy in the form of micro enterprise to begin with, and then progress towards an SME? So what do you think needs to be done to facilitate that transition?
It's a great question, and we can work on that one as well together, because I think that the second you really start to formalize your business as an SME, you create a lot of hurdles. If you want to hire and fire people, you have to think through all the labor context, which you didn't have to do previously. Obviously, there's all the tax implications, which you didn't have to think through previously. There is, if your business now starts to grow its turnover to a certain level, you need to think through a whole lot of other regulatory implications. So in some ways, I can understand why if I'm an informal SME operating in the informal sector, I'm going to want to resist formalizing as much as possible to try and, shield the business from that. And sometimes what does frustrate me about South Africa is that we have almost a European first world standard to regulation in a third world economy. And if you look at any economy that's really flourished for SMEs and for entrepreneurs, they typically have been ones that have been a little bit Wild West like. If you think about the US in the 1800s and the early 1900s, and you think about big parts of India, etc. So how that flows into South Africa, I think, is challenging, and I do think that I feel that certain, there should be as much as possible, and this is being tried by the policymakers to come up with a two-tier regulatory framework, such that there's a second tier in place for smaller businesses or medium businesses, but that then needs to kind of be pervasive across the whole, all policies, which are so complicated to implement and to execute in the context of South African policy change, that I don't know how that actually happened. So I don't have a good answer. I think it's a fundamental question, which hopefully policymakers are really applying their minds to. So yeah.
Absolutely. So I think your response really touched upon quite a bit on the government response, and that really was my next follow-up question. But also related to that, I can see Pumlani Majosi from Sasfin asking, how does Mr. Sassoon see South Africa's Ministry of Small Businesses? Is the ministry doing a good job in the country?
So the truth is, we actually haven't had that much to do with them, so I can't comment. Yeah, unfortunately, I can't comment.
Right. So we have, I think, addressed most of our questions now, and I wish to thank Mr. Sassoon for the engagement. But for a formal vote of thanks, let me now invite Professor Chipeta. He is the head of finance division within the school, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Uma. Thank you, everyone. On behalf of the School of Economics and Finance and the head of school, I'd like to take this opportunity to say a few words of appreciation in the form of a vote of thanks. Firstly, I'd like to thank you, Michael Sassoon, the CEO of Sasfin Bank, for taking your time to make this insightful presentation. We have learned quite a lot. From the beginning, you highlighted the importance of SMEs in growing the economy and facilitating employment. I think that's a key issue that governments around the world are grappling with, especially emerging markets, particularly South Africa. But not only did you highlight the importance of these SMEs, you also provided key insights into how the role that Sasfin Bank is playing in lending a helping hand to these entrepreneurs and growing their businesses further. I do take note of the initiatives that you've made, particularly the introduction of the digital banking platform. which ensures that the foundational elements of doing business are facilitated quite well. And also going beyond just lending to businesses, but making sure that those businesses succeed. That's highly commended in terms of the efforts that you have made. And particularly would also like to see this relationship going forward in terms of the bank engaging with our students and our faculty in terms of research and future webinars. That would be very highly appreciated. So we are greatly inspired by your great words, Michael. Finally, I would also like to take this opportunity to place on record our hearty thanks to the rest of the team in the support structures, and particularly our head of school for providing the leadership in this webinar series. I would also want to thank Mr. James Bernstein for helping us to link the school with Sasfin Bank. And over and above that, we've got sort of strong support structures from our admin end. I'd like to thank Mamosa Molitsane for the administrative support and guidance she has extended to all of us, and also Michelle, our events coordinator from the events department. I also note that there are colleagues from Sasfin Bank. I'd like to thank all the participants, including your colleagues there, for participating in these meetings, in this webinar. And also want to thank everyone that posed the questions. They were quite meaningful as well, and actually took the debate and the discussion even much further. So with that said, thank you very much, Mike. We look forward to engaging with you in more of these kind of like events going forward. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, and a big thank you to you and to Wits. And we also hope we can work with you on some of these initiatives. And just thank you for everything that you're doing for SMEs in South Africa and growing the next generation of entrepreneurs, hopefully. And we look forward to engaging again soon. Thanks to everyone else also for joining.
Thank you.